Over the past several years, we've been monitoring and figuring out what's been going on in Australia and trying to deliver our training programs. And Australia kind of handles things a little bit differently to the US. There's some similarities, but there are some differences. You know, when it comes to Australia, you basically have 5 states, not 50. But there's also a couple of territories, right? You have the Northern Territory, you have Tasmania, but basically 5 states. And they all have their own codes and regulations that they function from. And when it comes to codes and regulations, there's only one state in Australia that actually has regulations that requires operators of public facilities to maintain certain standards and also requires the operators to have certification. And that's Western Australia. The other 4 states, where you have Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, the health departments there have guidelines. And they may recommend that you have operator certification. They'll recommend the range of disinfectants and pH and so on and so forth. But I know that the health departments over there outside of Western Australia would really like to regulate those variables, just like Western Australia. Because just like the US, they have outbreaks over there. They have injuries over there. They have illnesses over there. They're not immune to RWIs. Western Australia, when it went through its process to develop its code, it started in 1990, a little before the MAC process began, but not much. And they went through several years, right? So in 1990, they started to review their qualification standards. In 1995, they had a actual review, formulation, and work. And in 2007, they started to finalize their codes and prepare the aquatic facilities for the regulations. Then in 2007 to 2009, they started to transition to the new regulations to start enacting them. And in 2011 is when they adopted the requirements in their code. So as you can see, even in Australia, it's a long, drawn-out process. Right? From 2000, it was 11 years from when they thought about revising their codes to actually developing the codes and enacting them was 11 years. So things move slowly, even outside of the US. And then in 2013, in Australia, there's been an explosion in water parks, spray parks, especially on the East Coast and the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. You drive up that coastline and it's like water park after water park after water park. And so in 2013, they adopted a new spray park code in Western Australia as well. And they do, as I said, require operator certification. And yes, the CPO course is an accepted certification in Western Australia. And we've worked hard to make sure that that happened with our instructors in Australia. That's it for regulations. But what's really unique about Australia is the fact that the industry has become really proactive and has taken the initiative to establish their own standards of practice. Now, as I mentioned, there's 5 states, and each state has a SPASA, a Swimming Pool and Spa Association of Australia. 4 of them came together, and the one outlier was New South Wales. So the 4 that came together were Western Australia, Queensland, South Australia, and Victoria, and they formed an alliance called SPASA Australia. New South Wales decided they didn't want to be a part of that, and so they created their own SPASA alliance. There's a lot of history behind that, but there's a Good ending to the story. And then a number of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, the Retail Association came together and formed another trade association called SPRA, the Swimming Pool Retail Association of Australia. See, because the SPASers were really focused on builders, and they never really took care of the retailers. So SPRA was formed to make sure that the interests of the retail associations, the retail stores, the service tax were being taken care of as well. And it was SPRA that took the initiative. All the different, see, in Australia, franchising is big. And there are major swimming pool service franchise companies. Pool Works, Swim Art, Clark Rubber, Jim's Pool Stores. And they all came together and said, you know what, we need to establish a national training standard, a national qualification. So they solicited the services of CIPSIC, which is the Construction and Property Services Industry Skills Council of Australia. There's a mouthful for you. And that's a government agency. And they develop skill standards for Australia. So SPRA approached CIPSIC and said, we'd like to develop these national training standards for the swimming pool and spa service industry. See, because prior to that, if you were a pool guy, your job description was buried in some other trade association. It was not recognized as its own trade. And so SPRA wanted to do something about that. And they felt that the avenue to achieving that recognition was to develop their own qualifications. So SPRA led the way. And so what they did was they started having these workshops where they brought in all industry parties, service technicians, the franchising companies, and they decided on what these qualifications were going to look like. What were the skills and knowledge requirements going to be for these qualifications? And we were privileged to actually attend one of those workshops so that we could have an input into what we felt those qualifications should include. And so the qualifications were finally adopted in the beginning of 2013. Right. So as you can see, the participants, industry regulators, franchise expert enterprises, technicians, state and territory training authorities, government departments, suppliers, and also the members of SPRA and SPASA. So they were all involved in the process in determining what these qualifications should include. And they decided on 2 qualifications. And those qualifications were Certificate 3 and Certificate 4. The Certificate 3 qualification is for the individuals that are just doing routine maintenance. So if all you're going in is cleaning the pool, backwashing the filter, brushing the walls, a typical service, a pool cleaning kind of service, then the Certificate 3 was the qualification that you needed. If you were going to do more than that and deal with the repair and installation of equipment, this has got nothing to do with builders. This is purely after what they refer to as aftermarket work. So if they were going to do replacing a pump, replacing a filter, repairing the chemical feeder pump, then the Certificate 4 qualification is what those individuals need. So the project overview, they established the project, they scoped the project, they prepared draft communications, they validated those drafts, finalized the project, they got national endorsement, and now they're in the delivery process. And that whole process from establishing what the project was to delivery took them about a year. Much faster process. Because it was industry driven. It was the industry that wanted to make that happen. So as I mentioned, here's the two qualifications, Certificate 3 for routine maintenance and the Certificate 4 for the repair and replacement individuals. Now, each unit or each qualification, they have what they refer to as core units of competency and elective units of competency. So a core unit of competency would be to monitor and maintain water quality. That would be a core competency. An elective competency might be, using management software to manage your business. And when it comes to the Certificate 3, there were 18 units of competency, 12 of which were core and 6 were elective. So they have to fulfill all the core elective requirements and then a number of the elective units of competency. And the same was true for the Certificate 4, core and elective units of competency, and in there you had 20 in total, 12 core and 8 electives. So once they were all established, then they went through the implementation process. Once SIPSIC, that skills industry group, finalized those units of competency, it then went to the government for approval. And once the government approved those qualifications, they then went onto the National Register, the training.gov.au website, for any registered training organization to be able to deliver those qualifications. So it's slightly different in Australia. Once it's a nationally recognized qualification by the government, I can't just go in there and say, well, I'm an instructor, I'm just going to teach and qualify these individuals. That's not how it works. You have to be what they refer to as a registered training organization. You then have to bring these qualifications into your scope as a registered training organization to be able to deliver those qualifications. And when it comes to these qualifications, as long as the training program can be mapped back to the skills and knowledge requirements for those qualifications, it doesn't matter what your training program is, as long as you can demonstrate that your training program actually does achieve those skills and knowledge requirements, the mapping. And that's exactly what we endeavored to do at the foundation, and we partnered with a registered training organization called Traction, and they're the ones that are now actually delivering NSPF training programs to meet the Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 qualifications. So they saw a lot of benefits to these national qualifications because it increases the professionalism, it improves the health and safety and public health and safety at these facilities, because these qualifications are both for residential and commercial facilities. And they saw it as a career path for people coming into the pool and spa industry. So there's a lot of traineeships that are going on right now, and government funded traineeships. And here's the breaking news, and this just came out yesterday. The press release was launched yesterday. The whole industry in Australia, all those state SPASs, SPRA, and yes, even New South Wales SPASA, have all come together and they've decided to unite as one governing body. And they're going to function under SPASA Australia. So that's good news. That's great news for Australia, because now the industry is going to have one voice. They're going to have consistency in message and hopefully consistency in training. So that's what's going on in Australia. Now I'd like to bring Silvia Uribe up to the stage, our International Development Manager, who's now going to tell you what's going on in Mexico and Spain.
Can everybody see me? And can you hear me? Okay. So I'm not even going to go up. I'm just going to stay here. Well, I have very good news, but because I have some constrictions on time, I'm going to be very brief. But after the meeting, if you have any questions, please come to the back or on the halls and come and talk to me and ask me any questions. Also, I'm going to be introducing Lydia Cepeda and Humberto Avaroa, who are on the back, and they are representing the Association of Pool Professionals in Mexico. And you might have some questions after I talk to you about what's going on in Mexico. Because of the constriction again of time, I only had selected 2 countries that I'm going to give you a brief summary of what's going on. But the good news is that during the last 6 years, I have been very, very excited to see how other countries are they have an increased interest on getting their standards up to date, and also they're very keen about training, because the two, they go together, right? You cannot have standards and then just leave it right there. You need to train the people, especially on countries where training has not been available before. So on Mexico, we actually have done a great job. And Alex mentioned that in Australia it took about 11 years. On Mexico, everything is really fast. I think that is because we eat a lot of peppers and we are excited. But actually on Mexico, on 4 years, they have gone from 0 to great news that I'm going to tell you. The organizations that you see right there on the screen, they are key organizations on the aquatic industry. COFEPRIS is an organization that reviews and sets standards. And I'm going to be honest with you, they still have a long way to go. But we are on conversations with them to let them know what is that they need to change in order to have standards up to date. And they are very open, and we are communicating with them and continue working with them. They have currently a regulation called the NOM 245 SS A1 2010. And that's the one that is that they are currently being used when they train their people. That's what they refer to. There is also an organism, is not right there, but it's an organism that is known as a CONOCER, and the Association of Pool and Professionals in Mexico, in NSPF. They had worked on a project to present before them a training project that they have accepted, but it's not yet mandatory. It's voluntary right now, but the great news is that we are on the last step to get the final blessing, so that way it can be mandatory. So that's like super news, because if you would just know all the hurdles that we have to go through these government agencies, and the labor that APP has done on 4 years is amazing, really. And then we have CONAGUA, that is the one that oversees that those standards are being that they are enforced and set. And last 2 weeks ago, actually, we met with some of the representatives of these organizations, and they were very, very open with us and excited about the CPO program. So those ones are some of the things that we are doing in Mexico. And like I said, Humberto and Lydia or myself can answer any specific questions about what is that we are doing specifically right there with any of these two organizations. And then Spain. On Spain, we have the Regulation 80/1998. This is applicable for public pools. And currently, I'm working directly with a division of the University of Barcelona to implement our certification programs right there. One of the things that they mentioned to me when I started working with them 3 years ago, and I presented a CPO certification program, they said, well, okay, yes, that's great news. Let us check around. And after they check all around the world for other programs, they came back to me and says, Sylvia, you guys have the best program, and we want to follow it. So now we are using kind of like the same structure that we are using in Mexico, so that way the government will require our certification program. So those ones are my 5 minutes, but I have 24 hours for you. If you have any questions, I can answer them, okay?